since all of you know me now, I'm not going to introduce myself, but I'll leave it to you, gentlemen. If you can go ahead.
Hello. Hi everyone, my name is Mohit. I'm the co-founder and technologist at Loyaltytics. We are a data analytics company, and I think there was a lot of talk going around about loyalty. I have been in the loyalty industry. We despise, by the way, the word loyalty because we feel that in retail there is nothing, called loyalty. There is engagement, but customers are loyal towards their spouses, their family. They're never loyal towards a retailer. I've been in the customer engagement industry for about 20 years. I've had the privilege of working with Tesco, Target across multiple geographies before we started Loyaltytics back in 2015. I had the privilege of working with a lot of big names in the market like Lulu Group, Sinomi, GMG over the last couple of years. So really looking forward to the discussion. And our technology, this thing at heart. So anybody wants to talk technology, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Hi. I'm Skanda. I take care of everything loyalty, data and analytics at Lulu. So a lot of what has been discussing in the past panel, I could relate to a lot of that, and I can take a lot of questions around that as well. So coming to my background, all my life I've been with, I've started my career as a data analyst, moved up, then I moved briefly into government services where I was working on data related to government entities. How does government look at data, the concept of use cases and business cases as such, right? And then I moved back into retail. So I've had a great journey. In UAE, I've been here for almost 7 years now. So that's about me.
Hi, Sunil here. I was just wondering, how do I present myself? Because I think it's been shown here as veteran CIO. But the point is, I think, today I'm in a space where, probably I can tell you that, I'm neither on the seller side of it or on the CIO side of it. So allow me to do that balancing role. Currently, I am, I'm on the work in progress mode of being on the advisory role for a couple of retail companies, non-retail companies. So that's the transition journey that I am doing currently as we speak. Prior to this, I was with Sinomi Retail as the Chief Technology Officer in Saudi Arabia, and I think that is what I'm going to share some of my experiences, what we have done in the Saudi market as far as the data is concerned. And in totality, if you ask me, I've been 28 years in retail. On the technology side of it, worked in Landmark Group, Aditya Birla, GMG, Wipro. So I've seen all the dynamics of what happens to the retail entity right from 1995 to what we talk about the buzzword of, I say buzzword, omni-channel, seamless, all those stuff, right? So I've seen both the sides of the journey. And happy to discuss a lot on not only on the data part of it, also but on the business side of it. Thank you.
Amazing. I think just to change things up a bit, we'll go this way for questions probably. But I just read somewhere today that, in God we believe, everybody else brings data. So I think, and that's something that you've kind of been working very closely on, Sunil, across your vast experience. Could you tell us something about the primary challenges that you faced when you, as a CIO or a CTO, when you started working on building data as an asset for organizations? So what are the challenges you faced and how did you kind of overcome that?
I think the most important, let me go back to my last previous experience of Sinomi Retail. And then just to give you a brief about what Sinomi was all about. I'm not trying to campaign here about the company. But the point is, I think, it was a vast, diverse kind of entity. We're talking about, fashion retail, we're talking about F&B, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking malls. Multiply that by 14 countries, right? Different languages, different cultures, and different topics, right? Now, when we typically deal with brands, so Sinomi was dealing with around 80 odd brands, right? From your Inditex, Zara, LCYKE, your Subway, Cinnabon, you name it, and you've got all the brands there. Now, where it comes to is, and where the challenge lies is, everyone has got their individual monolith systems, right? Every brand would enforce that, their own technologies at play. And when I say brand, and when I say that technology play, which means what data is segmented to that particular brand. And when a customer walks in, customer is actually divided by the number of brands that you carry, right? They don't identify you as one customer. That is where the entire proposition comes in. Now imagine I multiply that by different similar complexities, which is nothing but inventory, one of those topics that we have been discussing. Now inventory is an issue, customer segmentation is an issue, promotions are an issue, loyalty programs are an issue. Every company, every brand has got their own loyalty programs. How do we tackle it? So data is not only just about what we are talking about inventory or the customers. Data is all about how do you bring value to the company as a P&L? How do you bring value to the customer on the other side who is generating sales for us, right? I think this is where the inherent basic challenge comes in to ensure that companies which are large size companies and playing with different brands, different KPIs, right? How do we manage this entire ecosystem? That's point number one. Point number two is, in this entire process, how do we ensure that we have this one view of whatever we say, customer or inventory and all those stuff. So I think pragmatically the data is the only source which can bring these elements together. Now to give a simple example, we had close to 14 odd systems. Now you can imagine, in my life, this was the only thing that time when I see 14 odd systems playing across, right? And everyone had their own say. So basically, the way I could attack this entire solution was by bringing data into the forefront of decision making, right? So I think, and the other challenge that I faced was from a customer side of it, change management is very difficult. When I say customers, my internal users, right? Every brand had their own systems and interpretation of their own data. Now, bringing them in a common platform and making them understand the nuances of saying that this is what you want to read and this is what you want to take action on was a bit difficult challenge. So, just to summarize, one, you had multiple systems, right, across. You had multiple champions of those systems, right, across, who are not willing to take the extra work or getting into the new technology. Plus, add on top of it is, a resistance to change, right? And this is where I think my initial challenges on, data fragmentation, different systems, different applications started with it. But once you started getting insights or sharing insights with the customers, right? When I say customers, I don't misunderstand. My customers are internal customers, right? We start the journey from there before I even eventually land up to my last core customer, right? So I think that is the challenge of change management that we always deliver. And I will always be facing problems on that front.
I think, Skanda, my next question is to you. I think to take on from where Sunil left it. We're all, I think all of us in this room are customers of Lulu over a period of time.
That's right.
And and you're in this massive digital transformation stage, right? So how are you mining data and what's the importance of customer data that you're mining at different stores right now? And how are you kind of utilizing it in your journey?
Right. So the first and foremost part of this essentially is creating platforms, data platforms, right? Now when you look at Lulu as a business, right, if you take IT or data platforms as a solution, right, there are three different sets of users that are actively interacting with it. Right? One is your customer who is coming and making a purchase with you. Right? I know everything that the customer is buying. I know what drives that customer to make a purchase. I know what probably repels the customer from coming back to me. Right? And then there is my operations, who is essentially responsible for sourcing products, who is responsible for creating promotions, pricing, right? And then there is a third part for us, who is essentially the supplier, right? Now, as a data platform, right? Like, how do I create platforms that can enable different divisions inside the business and also outside the business to make better decisions? Like, for example, let's say I'm working with a chocolate supplier, right? And they are selling probably 1,000 tons of chocolate through us in a year, right? What can I tell my supplier that they already don't know about the customer that is coming to my store, which can help them sell 1,100 tons this year, right? Because in turn, I'm also going to make money from that, right? That essence, how can I tell that to that supplier? Is if I have a homogeneous or a harmonious mix of data, which I can translate into insights, give back to that supplier in a form or in a structure that they can understand and make better decisions. Right. So, yeah.
So, it's actually data getting utilized at all
Yes.
different aspects of the business, right?
Right.
So throughout the value chain, how do you use it?
Yes.
Amazing, great point. Mohit, you've been working with across so many countries with brands, and most of the times one of the challenges we face as brands is we have a very inside-out view, but you bring in that outside-in view, right? So there would be some blind spots that businesses typically look at. Could you share some of those ideas of where businesses typically find blind spots and they kind of miss out those points?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can pick up the conversation from the last panel, where there was a lot of human problems when it comes to digital transformation or data enablement, right? Most of the times, what I've seen organizations assuming is that a new tool, on which you're spending billions of dollars, is going to solve the problem, right? What they totally ignore is the human part of it. And it is prevalent not only in this region, by the way, it is everywhere. So I used to work with Target, leading their entire merchandising intelligence team. My role was to work with buyers, and my team, worked with across the categories, trying to make them more data-driven decision-making individuals. And we face the same issues with them. The entire part about change management, the entire part about moving from Excels to Tableau, the entire part about relying less on art and relying more on data, did not come naturally to them. The only difference between this region and the US is that US did it 14 years back, right? So they are ahead of the curve. And this is something that most of the time is ignored in organizations. Most of the times when you go in, there is always an IT strategy, there is always a technical strategy, but there is seldom a human strategy. There are a lot of fears that people have when technologies come into the organization. What is going to happen to my job? A marketer is going to ask that I was used to sending a billion SMSs every month. Now, if some piece of code is going to do it, what is going to happen to me, right? And multiplied by different fears, different number of people that would have. And to that effect, I think both Shinomi and Lulu have been fantastic case studies, right? I remember one time we were sitting with Sunil and Sunil mentioned that let's democratize this data, right? Let's put monitors on the screen, monitors on the floor. So there were like, I think 20 monitors that were procured everywhere on the floor, in cafeterias where earlier news was being played. We started showing dashboards. We started observing people where they're having lunch and they're talking about, Zara sales is this much. Why is Zara sales 10% less than this? So that was one small step towards sort of tackling that human element, right? Similarly with Lulu, sitting with buyers and buyers talking about how many VIPs am I retaining, how many least engaged are coming back to the business. Are the things that typically in the entire strategic component is missed mostly. And always the assumption is a new tool is going to come and create sort of swirl the magic band and things are going to be solved. That never happens. Most of the times tools get replaced because they just become a clever piece of technology sitting on the shelf, whereas the human element is completely ignored. And just going back to the Target days, I'm not sure if you guys know, Target went through a massive data breach which costed them about $2.5 billion. And that was a culmination of a big change, data-driven transformation, digital transformation that the then CEO was trying to do. It failed miserably, ended with a data breach, the CEO got fired, and then Bain was hired. So my team was tasked to work with Bain very, very closely. And one of the observations that they had was that most of the leadership is not on social media. They don't even know how to use their iPhones. So there was a training developed for them, right? If the people who are sort of making a decision are not very technologically savvy, how are you going to lead this transformation? There was small observation. One of the indicators for Target was, I remember, when somebody used to come and visit, there was a manual entry that used to happen. And Bain at one point pointed out, the moment this change, this becomes a digital system, that is when your organization is truly transforming digitally, right? It is not only going to be in the obvious areas of e-commerce, of data, but also the human element, that is going to happen. So it is a very complex problem. It takes, months, if not years, to be able to solve. But the idea is just to be aware of it. That's going to be the hardest challenge to solve. And there are, dime a dozen tools in the market which can do the job. But the human part is the most creative part of the thing, which often gets ignored and overlooked.
Yeah, I think great insight. And since it's all coming back to human beings using technology and in this space, I think it's largely to do with culture, right? So Sunil, in your leadership role, how do you kind of cultivate a culture of data decision, data-driven decision making? So how do you cultivate that in a large organization? Could you share something?
I think honestly we failed there miserably. To be very honest and candid with you, Because the point was, I think somewhere, as I said, everyone had their own styles of working things, right? And as Mohit brought in the element of, it's not about tools or technologies. At the end of the day, it is more about people who are driving these tools or processes or KPIs, right? And that's where I think we failed big time. And when I say failed big time, the reason I'm saying is it's not about getting the right technology or right place, right? I'll give you a simple example, right? Today we are talking about, getting, accuracy in the data side of it, right? That's the most important challenge from a technical perspective. If I have to convince a user like him, it's very important that he first thing relies on the data, right? I think that's the most important challenge, and it is irrespective of what tools you're talking about today. So at the core lies, how much data is fragmented and how much data can I bring in, right? And when I say data, it's not only now technical data, it's FTPs, it's files, any type of data that you're talking about, right? Digital marketing data. You talk about any type of different variations of data, right, that you bring on the table. So that is number one. Number two is very important is, I think as we progress in this journey, right, as he said, as Mohit said, we forget the element of human intervention big time here. It is either as IT project or it's more of, a business KPI project, right? The best example that I always give is, today the boardroom has a variation of thoughts. Boardroom comes in saying that people are talking about AI and my company is not into AI, right? And I am wondering from BI to AI, there's a huge journey that we need to take in, right? You're not good at your BI strategy and you're talking about AI. So there's a difference, right? And as practically what we have faced here is when we approach the so-called merchandisers, your marketing guys, your supply chain guys, and the moment you talk about, giving this data as a tool to take decisions, they are on the back foot, right? It's like I have created this sort of Excel workings, and it's been working for 20 years, 25 years, and I'm the king, right? So they are ring-fenced this entire, and then you add to that you have a team of people who are equally synergized into getting those stuff done. So I think it becomes a very difficult challenge for us as a technology guy to bring in that change, right? So what we did is, I think here, as I said, very clearly what we did is we started collecting the data. Obviously, as you said, hundreds of people jumped up saying that this is wrong, fair. I think we were happy because people started commenting on the data, right? Last 20 years, there have always been different versions of data being presented to the board, right? And everyone was comfortable to get those side of it. Nobody was bothered to report on the sales part of it, but everyone was like, IT doesn't give me this, IT doesn't give me that. But the first time they started discussing the data was wrong. Fair enough, the first step was achieved by saying that okay, data is there. Now try to figure out what is going wrong there, right? In every segment, right from your CRM to your loyalty programs to your inventory dashboards and everything. We started talking on those lines, right? The board was more interested to know what is going wrong now, and who was the owners of those people? The people who were actually driving this industry. So it moved on from a technology thing to more of a business kind of thing. We also ensured that the KPIs were changed during the process, right? So everyone had that year-long KPI saying that targets of sales and all the stuff, cost reduction. We also managed to incorporate saying that data accuracy is one of the KPIs that you need to do. Right. It comes with a lot of push from either side, but I think we achieved that level of thing to the extent that we were very comfortable to present the data to the people, right? And we avoided these brand styles because what happened is, as I said, example, Zara versus an LCYK versus a Mango, we are different brands and different P&L, right? And when you show that directly on the on either on your mobiles or on TV screens, it's like a subject of discussion, right? And my data is wrong, my data is correct, you're reached there, you're not reached there. I think we wanted that to happen in some form. It took good 4 to 5 months to reach that stage. And then finally, once we are there, I think we started talking on, so I could see that personal change where the boardroom discussions were more on, okay, why didn't you achieve this? What was your target? What was your budget? Not that, I'm depending on your individual feedback. And then it's a post-mortem, right? Because there is nothing to prove from data perspective. But now data is coming in front. And when the board comes in, board also has this data.
Right.
And when I say board, typically managements or boards, whatever you call it, they have a pre-read, right? So discussions are much more fruitful, and this all happens because data is at the center, right? Now imagine, as I said, different variations, different formats, different Excel sheets, different people behind it. Bringing that change element is the most important part. You can't push technology per se, but I think if it comes on down, grounds up, and when you can prove yourself with data, right? Snippets saying that, okay, this is what is happening to your brands, to your brand values.
Right.
I think that's where I think the change happens.
Yeah, true. And like you said, data never lies, right? Absolutely. Okay.
So I'll just add on to what Sunil just said, right? Like, so during my first year of job, right, my boss told me this one thing, which is, I was a data analyst back then. Okay? So my boss told me one simple thing, which was, you torture the data enough, okay? It will eventually speak what you want to hear. Right? So it's very important to not just get carried away by what data is telling, and that's where the whole human element comes into play, right? Like, okay, fine, data is telling me this, but how can you correlate to what it is telling me, right? If you don't correlate, it's absolutely BS.
Right. But I think I'll because I keep wearing my business hat over and over again. What kind of outcomes have you seen at Lulu by utilizing this data? What kind of business outcomes have you kind of realized through some of the initiatives that you've taken to have improved data visibility within the organization?
Right. So, so the first and foremost thing is, we have always been people who are looking at, sales and, the GP that we're able to achieve, right? And the moment we started talking about data, we started talking about customers, right? The business started understanding it's not just my sale or my GP. Of course, it matters, but that's not the first and foremost thing that is important for me as a business. It's more about how do I bring in loyalty. Again, I'm bringing the loyalty aspect into this, but essentially the value of a customer who is loyal for the business versus someone who is like a cherry picker, right? You know what is the value of a customer who is very loyal to you, and that made the business realize, whom should we invest into, right? And I can talk about campaigns, promotions that we have done, but essentially the idea is how it's more on the business side, where business was able to understand the value of customer segment, right, and take actions on that, right? So yeah.
Amazing. And I think this is the longest I've been sitting on two panels, and we've only heard AI once. So I want to talk about it a bit more, and especially in data's perspective, right? So there's a lot of conversation about how AI can improve how companies consume data. So Mohit, will be great to hear your insights on or give us a future sneak peek, what will it look like in the days to come.
Yeah. So that would be a very tough question, because anybody who tells you that they have a clue what is going on in the industry is probably lying. Nobody has a clue. Every month, I was just joking with somebody who feels like the rug is being swept from under your feet every month. There's something or the other coming around. There was multi-agentic frameworks. There was Sora AI that was coming in. I've never been so scared and so excited at the same time. And not because of what is happening, but at the pace with which is happening. Right? This is something that we envisioned for like 20 years on the line. There was a very nice blog called Wait But Why by Tim Urban, and he wrote this in I think 2015. Everybody who's interested in AI should read this blog. What he envisioned, and he sort of through a series of reasoning, he actually convinces you that by 2030, you will be making a century worth of progress every month. Right? So that is what is and in terms of data, in terms of AI, in terms of everything, right? So there are a couple of hypotheses I have, given that I've been in this industry for 20 years, way before it was cool or AI. We started as data scientists, decision scientists. There are a couple of things which are certain, right? We are entering the era of humans being disrupted, right? Not companies. First, humans being disrupted. Now imagine the skill set that you had, which you relied on for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. There's a modern hugging face which can do it better than what you're doing. Whether it is your job as a CEO, CIO, a data analyst, a data scientist, a content creator, a marketer. Sam Altman recently said 95% of the marketing agencies would be out of job in the next 3 years. So what we are facing is just unprecedented, right? And it also at the same time presents a great opportunity, right? For us as people to become makers. Right? I'll give a couple of hypotheses. For example, we're talking about data being closer to the users. I think Priya alluded to that in the last question. One of the trends that we are seeing is the trend of data democratization, which means that if my data is there and my decision maker is here, what is the IT team or the decision science team doing between, right? The democratization part is bringing the user closer to data. Why can't I ask my data, what is my sales for the last 3 months? Why do I need a team of analysts to sit in between and take 4 days for that data to come back where the moment of taking the decision is passed? This is real, right? Hex is doing it. Databricks has recently launched it. It is real. the CEO can just on Teams or on Slack or wherever else, can just ask a question and get the data back, right? That is the thing that is generally going. And imagine the power that it would unleash for users, where they are able to get insights back in seconds, not days. And the bureaucratic load that it would, lift off organizations. So that is one thing which is absolutely certain it is happening. A lot of companies, including ours, is working towards it, and we are fairly confident we'll be able to get it. The second, I'll sort of try risking be a little bit more technical here, is the entire concept of agentic frameworks that is coming along, right? What I'm sure that everybody would have interacted with ChatGPT, GPT-4o and everything. That is in technical terms, it is called zero-shot modeling. You ask a question, there is although it is AI, but it's dumb AI. Through a series of NLPs, it gives you a response back, right? It does not reason, right? It does not ask itself a question, right? But the core of intelligence is reasoning, right? For example, all of you have come here. Just the act of coming here, you would have reasoned so much. Should I go on a Tuesday? How's the traffic going to be? But there will be drinks, there's going to be dinner, there's going to be networking, right? So through a series of steps, you have reasoned it, right? And in organization, any decision making, the core is reasoning. For example, a CEO asks, why is my sales going down? A marketing team is going to have a view on it. They're going to say that, by the way, my footfall was down. Or last year there was, a campaign that was running, this year there's no campaign. A store ops team is going to have a perspective on it, that, maybe we had out of stock, maybe we had less stock. A customer team is going to have a perspective on it, right? And they would sort of collude or they would sort of get together and reason about it, right? Multi-agentic frameworks do that. They sort of, you can create agents in AI, and there are multiple frameworks, Screw AI and Autobahn. I encourage everyone to experiment with these frameworks, where you can create these different worldviews. You can say that you are a marketer, you are a customer specialist, you are a CIO, you are a CEO. And if you go to YouTube and type multi-agentic frameworks, you'll see magic unfold in front of your eyes. Imagine the power it unleashes. Right now, a CEO who's able to ask, what is my sales for the last 3 months? They would be able to ask, why is my sales down? And imagine this why question for which, very expensive consultants are hired. A bot is doing that, right? The cost pressure that would come down, the speed and nimbleness of decision making is going to be absolutely unprecedented. And this is coming, right? This is absolutely coming, and in the next few months. The other thing also is, as humans, right? One key skill set which I talk to my team about is that we collaborate as humans, right? As marketing team, merchandising team, but we are entering the era of human-machine collaboration. Machines are very dumb until now. You ask them to code, you tell them, please give me, a login page. Please give me this, please give me that, right? They are slaves. But now they are going to rise and, they're going to provide intelligence. How do we collaborate with machines? For example, for a coder, now the most predominant role is going to be that of a reviewer, right? Human reviewers. Because the coding is going to be done by, some Hugging Face model. But then the review part is going to be that human-machine collaboration. Yeah? So those are things and challenges which we have to start thinking about. And I always say, to my team as well, in this wave, not organizations, humans are going to be disrupted first. We have seen that happening with content creators. We have seen that happening with DevOps guys. We have seen that happening with testers, with Copilot X, and we're just going to be sort of spreading like wildfire, right? So this is something that we really have to think about. And again, I would sort of end it with the same thing, that I myself have never been so scared and excited at the same time. I'm just, this is that popcorn moment for me, where I can sit down and watch, what is happening. But I would highly recommend, if you are sort of interested, you should go to YouTube, look at what is happening in the AI industry from a technical point of view, right? And I would be happy to chat about, this thing, because it's something that amazes me every day.
Just to add on to that, let me give a reality check here. I just happened to meet last month a CEO, he's got 7 or 8 different verticals. I don't want to name the company. But, I think what he started with saying that I want to make my company as an AI-driven company. So I said, what do you mean by that? So the basic simple answer what he gave me was, I got a lot of manpower, right? I want to get rid of them. So I think this was the first KPI that he spoke to me. He said, look, a lot of visa problems, a lot of health issues, insurance issues. And I said, look, your AI definition is totally different. So I think, this is the reality. I think I'm not joking or taking it, but I think this is where the reality comes in. Yeah. So I think, just coming back to what Mohit said, highly technical in nature, but how much relevance is there in the current industry where we're talking about? I think that's a given case. Today you're talking about, as I said, ChatGPT is one of those more than. When I'm talking from a board or management perspective, don't get me wrong here, but I think the flavors, the understanding is totally different, right? As I said earlier also, I think the mandate was saying that, look, 10 years back, a lot of companies have done AI, and what the fuck are you doing here right now, right? And this is where the messages are going wrong. And you as a CIO, CTO, you're not able to position that the way you want to, right? Because you understand what is the nuances from the business side of it, what your business is doing, what technical landscape that you're carrying, right? I think from that perspective, going to where you are and where you want to aspire is a huge gap. It will take some time. It is going to be the buzzword for next 3 to 4 years. Ironing and churning are going to happen. This is the norm that is going to happen. Somewhere we will find a middle path. I think that's where I think we are looking for. And as I said, half the thing I didn't understand what I said, being a CIO myself, right? So the point is, I think somewhere reality will kick in, somewhere that practical experiences will kick in, somewhere the business participation will kick in, and I think that's where the due diligence and acceptance will come in, right? As I said today, the people who are going to make money on the AI side is the product companies, the service companies, right? Because every 3 years, every 4 years, you require a technical buzzword to come in. I think, and I'm not just trying to negate the factor of AI part of it, but I think it will take its own time. That's the reality of the game.
Just one point I missed to make was, I'm not sure if you have heard about OpenAI's recent acquisition of Rockset, a database, right? So we were one of the only companies in the region which were using Rockset. We started with them way back, 5 years back, and that sort of enforces and testifies how important data is for even a company like OpenAI, and the fact that none of the traditional database companies or database technologies have been able to fulfill what they are trying to do. Right? They bought it presumably for about $400 million, and just with a KPI of shaving off half a second, 500 milliseconds from their response on ChatGPT 4. And they it's a huge acquisition. It impacts their customers. Rockset has said that we're not going to provide support, but again it puts data again at the center of the conversation, even with something like AI.
Amazing. I think all that we can all agree on is this is very Star Trek days to live in, and I think very exciting times ahead for all of us. Lots to learn, and before I can say beam us up, Scotty, any questions? We can take probably 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Listening to Krishna and Sunil both, that we're talking of the traditional way or the people of a certain age group in these decision making, and the Gen Z who is now joining the trail, who have been assigned a certain task to do. I think it's a very challenging situation for the CIOs and CTOs. How are they going to fulfill the requirements of both these streams with the same data set? So it's very truly said, we have not learned the BI and we want the AI. So it's very rightly said. Organizations have not learned the BI, but they want the AI. But we need to understand that the next generation who is now onboarding the journey are only talking AI. Yeah. They don't want to listen to the word BI.
Very good.
I think, don't get me wrong. I think the market is going to force on you. There's no choice, as we said. It's not. It's just that a lot of things have been discussed. A lot of things, protocols have not been defined as we speak. Right? Today, as you said, or even for me, what is the definition of AI? It depends on person to person. Right? What are we talking about? Use cases? Relevant use cases are not there in the market, which is proven. You require a substantial customer base to get that part. See that the investment flows in, because everything is about return on investment.
Try telling this to a Gen Z.
Absolutely.
He refuses, no. Why do I need to check? It's telling me that's the right thing. I will go by this. Okay, sorry, I opened up.
I think it's a learning curve for everyone.
Cool. Kritika, can we take one more question? Or is the bar ready?
Bar is ready, but we can take another question.
Okay, thank you. Santosh has one more question.
So, this question to Sunil, in many organizations, they are trying to create a different departments. I have seen that the people are creating a separate customer data management department and a separate loyalty department, separate analytics department. So, I'm not able to understand how this department will fulfill their role when we separate the customer and the loyalty separately.
I think these are traditional organizations that you're talking about today. As we speak, if you're redesigning the entire structure, I think I would go with a common CDP approach rather than giving it as multifaceted of customer, inventory, people, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter, right? I think way forward, if you ask me from a technology perspective, from a business perspective, data is one, right? How do you want to segmentize is up to the business functions to own. What you're coming for, was referring to my earlier discussion where you have individual powerhouses who are trying to create whatever they wanted to create, and things work that way to some extent. Today, I think, without data, you don't have that edge. Otherwise, a product is a product, right? What I sell at Nike or what I sell at Apple are same. What is the differentiator that I'm bringing on the table? These are the differentiators. That can only happen when I get data as one form, right? Not subsets of data. You're getting a point. Hopefully, I've answered your question.
Just a small observation I had, when we were working with Target, one of the things that they did beautifully was be very conscious about the goals that were created, right? If we want to put customer at the center of the decision making, because loyalty is something that has to be owned by everybody, right? If your product is not on the shelf and you're promoting it, does it impact loyalty? Yes, it does. Then it is merchandiser job also. The merchandisers they got goals for retaining VIPs. In addition to whatever the category sales was, that you have to retain 20% of the VIPs, right? So just that thinking of goal setting across organizations, it has to reflect in goals that, when you're putting the customer at the center of decision making, right? So that thought, has to come from leadership for everybody to be binding on the same objective.
Amazing. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Great conversation. I'm very energized. Thank you very much for sharing.